and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and I'm excited to welcome to the show Cynthia Kane. She's the author of The Pause Principle: How to Keep Your Cool in Tough Situations. In this conversation, we're talking about how to use the pause as a powerful tool to improve communication, especially in high-stress moments. Cynthia explains the science behind our reactive instincts and introduces her soften method for pausing, refocusing, and responding mindfully. I know I could use some improvement in this area, so if you can use some improvement for your communication skills to reduce stress in your interactions, this conversation with Cynthia Kane is for you. Well, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Cynthia Kane. Cynthia, welcome to Beyond the To-Do List.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be with you today.
I'm very excited to talk to somebody who has worked, or is working, I should say, in communications. I was a communication major in college. Obviously, then that moved into, I did radio show stuff on college campus, as well as, other things like that. And little did I know podcasting would exist at all at the time. But I always like dipping into communications. This is one of those interesting topics. You've got a book, brand new book, called The Pause Principle: How to Keep Your Cool in Tough Situations. And man, did I need this, and still do. And a lot of other people do too. It's all about poor communication and what we can do about that. Talk a little bit about some of those productivity pitfalls when poor communication is allowed to just run wild.
Yeah. So, when communication is not at the forefront, really what ends up happening is a lot of misunderstandings, which creates a lot more back and forths, which creates a lot more email back and forths, a lot more meetings, right? We don't have that clear, concise messaging that often leads to more clarity, more moments where we feel like a situation has been resolved. It tends to just lead to more time. Right? We don't get our time back when we are using vague language or offering maybe too many words that can cause confusion. It just creates more back and forth.
And often it's one of those things where it's like, we hear this phrase often where it's like, this meeting could have been an email. And in a way, that's it's not quite what you're saying, but it's kind of what you're saying. It's adjacent to what you're saying, I guess, where, hey, let's not just get in a room and hash it out. Let's pause for a second and really think about what's being said, how I want to say it, how I feel about what's being said, or how I feel about what I want to say. That's essentially what you're getting at here with strategies to have effective, it's a way to have an effective strategy for dealing with these tough situations and being mindful as you're communicating, ultimately.
Correct. Yeah. I think because in difficult situations, what happens so often is our biology takes over and we are just going off of instinct and we're winging it. Right. And a lot of times that's when we say things we really don't mean, or we have to backtrack on things that we've said, or, we've started out really strong and then suddenly we've completely lost our point because we got flustered or we need to shut down in that moment. And so just being able to take that pause, right, take a moment to be able to access ourselves again, re-engages, redirects us, refocuses us so that we are back on track. Right.
So let's start with, why does it seem, and especially now, because a lot of us are communicating through digital means, so there's also this kind of digital disconnect of I'm not face to face with the person, whether it be social media, whether it be texting, email obviously has been around for years, decades now. Gosh, that's hard to really accept. But why do we find it so hard to pause before reacting instead of responding?
Yeah. Well, it really is actually our biology, how we are wired. We are wired to react because if you travel back towards the Stone Age, we were really in survival mode all the time, looking out for threats all the time, really trying to gather food, find food, fend off the elements, so to speak. And evolutionary psychologists have found that our nervous system has not changed since that time. So any environmental, psychological, emotional threat brings us into the stress response where the cortisol is rushing through our bodies, our heart starts pumping, our body is really in defense mode, and our armor goes up and we are just ready to attack. And so what's happening now is instead of it being lions, it's now our colleagues, it's now our partners, it's now our children, it's now just the day-to-day interactions that we have that are pushing us into the fight, flight, or freeze. So really, we react because that is how we are wired to do, which is why it's so challenging to pause in those really just, uncomfortable moments. And everybody will just say, well, just pause or just take a breath. And it sounds so easy, but to actually do it, we don't learn how to do these things,
And two of those, flight is run away or fly away, I guess. Mm-hmm. Fight is where we get into real trouble because we're lashing out. Freeze is the one that's similar, though not exactly the same as pausing. I would say freezing, and give me your input on this, but I would say freezing is when you pause, but you're not contemplative, you're not present, you're not analyzing the situation. You're just like, oh crap, avoidance.
Yes, completely. And it's almost like I liken it to, old arcade games. Like if you ever went into an arcade or still today, and there's just one that's unplugged, like that's what it is. You are just completely shut down. You are not online for anything.
Yeah. If we're going to short circuit our already existing wiring or rewire, how do we start to get into that awareness and recognizing those signals, those stress signals, in order to then, because if we still don't even recognize it and then we go to one of those three modes, then we're just going to keep doing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awareness is the first step to all things, really, right? So with communication, most of the time we focus on speaking or listening, and it's all very mind, brain centered, right? And we forget that we have this whole thing underneath our chin, which is our body. And our body really tells us very quickly whether we are going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. We don't notice it now because everything's happening so quickly, right? So our work is, can we start to slow down, meaning paying attention to what is happening in our body when we are in a conversation, whether it's a pleasant conversation or an unpleasant conversation. So we're starting to pay attention to what sensations are happening within you. So sensation means your heart starts beating faster. You can feel your heart beating faster. Maybe you start to sweat. Maybe your jaw clenches and gets really tight. Maybe you feel in the pit of your stomach just like nausea, right? There is a sensation going on before you go into what I like to call like your default reactions, which are, lashing out or getting passive aggressive or shutting down or all those things. And it's first being able to see, can I identify sensation in my body? And for a lot of us, that's really hard to do because we don't pay attention to our bodies at all. I mean, only when we think about we want to eat healthy or we need to exercise. But when it comes to actually engaging and interacting on a day-to-day basis, it's not top of mind. So the first step is really the awareness of your body and what is happening within it, if it's comfortable or not.
And that sensation, I should note here, is the first word in an acronym for your soften method, SOFTEN. So sensation is the first one. What are the next 5? Let's follow through on those.
Yeah. So, because when you were talking about we're kind of subbing in the parasympathetic nervous system and subbing out the sympathetic nervous system, right? So the parasympathetic is the rest, digest, it's the calm. So the first thing we need is that awareness, which is that sensation, because that sensation is really our cue to know, okay, we're going to go into the way that we've always done this. So now maybe I can pull a different tool in or a practice so that I don't go there. So the rest of this acronym are those practices. So one would be O, which is owning your discomfort. And I can talk more to them, but I'll just list them right now.
Yes.
It's owning your discomfort. Then F is focusing on the present moment. T is taking a breath. E is our eyes turned toward another person or the group of people. And N is need to say. So you can draw practices from any of those. And there's tons of practices in my new book, but those are the ones that you're going to start subbing in so that you pause, you re-engage, you refocus, and begin again. Because in that moment, you get the opportunity to choose then how you engage.
Okay.
Where before we don't give ourselves that space between.
Let's talk a little bit about owning your discomfort and what that means.
Yeah. So I like to think of it as self-soothing in the moment, because when we are in tough situations, we're really always looking outward for the other person or group of people to validate us in that moment, to say, I hear what you're saying, or I understand. I'll go back and I'll make those changes, or whatever it might be. We're really looking for the other person to buy into what we're talking to. And that doesn't usually happen. So what we have to do is we have to turn inward in that moment and own our own discomfort that we're feeling and validate ourselves. So it looks like doing finger tapping. You know, you can tap your fingers, your pointer to your thumb, your middle to your thumb, your ring to your thumb, your pinky to your thumb. And as you're tapping, you can say things like calm begins with me. You can say, you know, I'm feeling really relaxed. And you don't even have to do the finger tapping. It can be done under a desk, right? All these practices are supposed to be ones that people can't really see because it would be odd. So yeah, but or the other is you can, you know, put it on your leg and thigh and press into your fingers, or you can rub the inside, like there's this little flap on our ear called the tragus. And if you rub it, you can feel your body just starting to relax and ground again. So owning your discomfort is finding ways to turn inward and tell yourself, I'm okay right now. Everything is fine. Because once your body knows that it's safe and calm, then you have a calm mind, which then is also calm words, right?
Gotcha. So it seems like that step is more about acknowledgement, and you said self-soothing earlier, but that's not what I'm going for. What was it? Oh, disengaging the defensive mechanisms so that we can think clear-headedly through the rest of the process.
Yes. And I think all of them really do that. They all really disengage and detach us from the chaos. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to be able to exist within the chaos and not let it become us.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
And so then we can move on. I mean, and there's more in that there, obviously, in the book, in that section, but then the focus on the present is next. So what are we doing with that present moment, focusing on it?
Yeah. So this one is really so that you unhook from the back and forth, like the language, because sometimes we can get so caught up in the other person's language and we get very, very distracted. So this is to bring us into the present, because in the present is when we can think clearly, right? It's when we can be supportive. It's when we can be creative. Like these are the moments where we get to do those things in the present moment. So to bring us in back, because when we're in a conversation, we are not in the present moment. We are in the conversation, right? So to reconnect us to the present moment, we can, start broadcasting to ourselves what we're seeing. So even just saying like painting, computer, pen, chair, right? In a monotone voice, you're just labeling what you're seeing around you, brings you back into the present moment. And nobody knows that you're doing this. The same thing with, you can just even move your attention and asking yourself, what are my hands doing? What are my feet doing? What's my belly doing? And it's that small. It's like that gentle attention that just moves us out so that then we can come back. Because a lot of people ask, well, the pause is in a very long period of time. No, it's not. It's really not. So, yeah.
Okay. And then you said, take a breath. So this is a moment where, we're not, I think some people are thinking, oh, so this is when I do deep breathing exercises like meditation. They're not exactly wrong, but it's not that extensive.
No, it's not that. And this is really this is like a lighter breathing technique. Meditation is something that I think is a great practice to do outside of conversation because it does help you during conversation. But this isn't that. This is like going to a breathing pattern. So you're thinking something like you're going to inhale for 5, you're going to hold for 5, and then you'll exhale for 5, right? So just inhaling, holding, and exhaling, you begin to soften the body, right? Because that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to put our armor down, open ourselves up so that we can be fluid, right? We can pivot, we can be flexible, we can start thinking clearly again. Okay. So yeah, like more of a breath pattern.
Gotcha. So, and what is this connection between breath and communication? Like how does breathe? I mean, obviously we're breathing while we communicate when we're face to face, and we're communicating not face to face, but there's a deeper connection to breathing and communication that you talk about in the book.
Yeah. So, I mean, most of us, when we're in challenging situations, we forget that we're breathing and we don't notice our breath at all. And for some, if we're like really trying to get our point across, we can do something called breath grabbing, which is like, right? Like we're trying to get our words out. And all of that is really stress related, right? Like that is us in our sympathetic nervous system. And so when our breath is in our chest, or if we're doing breath grabbing, or if we're holding our breath, that means that our body is not calm, which means our words cannot come out in a calm way, right? They will be in a heightened state as well. So our work is to maybe see if we can even move the breath to the belly, because we want to access the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest. And it's like one of the longest nerves called the vagus nerve in our body, and it's the longest parasympathetic nerve. And so if we can access that nerve pretty quickly, then we can get to like rest faster in the body. And by doing belly breathing, by taking the breath out of the chest and moving it into the belly, doing deep breaths from the belly, we access the vagus nerve. So that relaxes the body, which means that we're grounded, which means then we can actually access language, because everyone wants to know what the right way is to say something. And there's got to be like the perfect way to say something. And so we look for scripts and we look for dialogue, but we can't actually use those scripts or use that dialogue that we were given until we address the root, which is what's happening in the body. We have to calm the body before we can actually use language that other people can understand and that we respect.
Because the body is so connected to that emotional state. Yes. Even though those first 2 steps, or is this I'm forgetting now if this is the 4th one. So the first 3 steps still have to do with our emotions, but this is one that we're really in our body. And that's the one that's going to, because it has to do with the body, it's calming the nerves down. It's gaining control back over, I guess, is a better way to put it.
That's a lot of what this moment gives you is control, right? You remember that you actually have control over yourself in this situation where most of us feel out of control all the time, right? And in conversation, it's the same thing.
So the next step is eyes towards another, which has to do with looking at the other person or the person that we're communicating with. Again, this one can be interesting because we're doing a lot of our communication via channels versus face to face. So it's definitely different than it originally was in human history.
Yeah. I mean, now we are, when we're in front of someone is actually easier in a way, I think, to access this idea, right? You have to do a little more work when you're behind a screen and you're writing an email or you're sending a text to really think that there is another person on the other side of this who is actually receiving this. And that way it brings them out of where in our mind they start to become in these moments, right, is the other or like the enemy if we're in a tough moment with them, right? So when you're face to face with somebody, you can look at them and you can think of, all the things that you appreciate about that person or how helpful they've been or, how they've really made it so that your work life is easier or whatever it might be, right? Whereas if you're behind a screen, you're not going to see them. So you have to start to visualize that person in front of you. You have to really think about them and, maybe wishing them things that would be good for them, like a wonderful day or, kindness or those kinds of things can turn that person into a person again, into like a human being as opposed to a lion or a tiger or a bear.
Now, obviously, there's a difference between doing that face to face with the person versus doing it with a disembodied communication method. Of course, way more people are now more okay with doing video calls, and there's some amount of visual cues and body language that can happen there, but often it's through text and emojis are part of it, or it's through email where it's a long worded email and you've got to try and decipher what's going on there. So there's different approaches we take here to rehumanize the person we're communicating with. Talk a little bit about face-to-face is one thing, and how do we do that digitally as well?
So when we're communicating digitally, what we have available to us that we don't necessarily have face-to-face is time, right? So we actually get to really sit back, receive something, and process it. So we get to start to tap into the sensation in the body, understanding, okay, this is uncomfortable for me. I need to share something or I need to say something. And then we start to get into, okay, well, I need to remember that this person is somebody that I care for, that I support, that I want to be helpful to. What is the best way for me to share the information that I need to share? I want to make sure that it's clear, concise, right? And I also want to be conscious. So I want to ask myself, I've written it all out. Then I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, okay, is this kind? Is this honest? Is this helpful? And is this necessary? And if it doesn't filter through those 4 questions, you cut it. You reword it. But what you get in the digital world is control over when you respond. We don't remember that, because we see everything as a wildfire instead of a barbecue pit. But if we could sit back and we could just say, okay, this is actually something I can take my time with, then clarity is right at your fingertips.
So some people would push back and say, if I get a text from my boss, the expectation is an instant response. So now that said, there is a smaller amount of text, so it's not as much to dig through. You still have time. You're not face to face. So what's the dynamic there look like?
Well, so what you can do is just let your boss know that you're taking your time, right? So even just responding and saying like, I received this message. I need an hour to think this through and I'll get back to you. Is that does that timeline work for you? Yeah. Or it's even just asking, is this urgent? Meaning, does this need to be done within the next hour and a half, or do I need to respond within, 3 hours? You have to be extremely specific with your language when you're doing text and when you're doing email, or else you get this back and forth that takes the time and we are no longer productive during the day.
Yeah. Right? It sounds like there's a kind of clarifying set of questions to kind of say, okay, what is the real scenario here versus what's in my head versus what's the real sense of urgency here? Again, because in a society where we're all following the same rules, we don't have, but that's not what we're in. Like we sometimes, in other words, sometimes I'm just going to be blunt. Sometimes bosses text out of the blue and they text when it's an emergency and they text when it's not. And that channel really should be a quick cut. Like, in other words, email is longer form and not as urgent, or shouldn't be, because you don't know when they're going to see it. Texting, it's like they probably got a ding, an audio cue, and then they see it visually and then they read it. And it means you want that response sooner. Yeah. We all know people who don't go don't adhere to these rules, common sense rules all the time.
So, I mean, I think that in that moment, it's like I used to be in situations where I would get those dings and my whole body would just, erupt into heat, just like heat rising in my body, feeling so much tension and stress. And it is about that sensation, feeling that sensation, finding one of these practices to calm the sensation so that you can access that part of you that can just knock it out easily, right? That can just understand, like, okay, I can separate myself emotionally. I can drop the story around this and focus on the direct experience, which is this is what's needed, and then do what's needed, done, boom, bam, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, we still have that time. If you're having heat every time a certain person texts you, that's a situation that, outside of this process, this soften process that needs to be addressed at a time when you're not in one. Right. So
it's definitely true.
And that's a whole conversation. But it's, going there very momentarily, that is one of those things where it's like, hey, let's all get on the same page. Like if there's an emergency, here's the emergency method. Here's the, maybe it's an actual call. Maybe emergency is call. Texting means it's urgent, but not an emergency.
Exactly.
And then email is not urgent. And I don't know what non-urgent would be. That would probably be email as well. But you get on the same page. Or again, we've also got these other things like Slack and things like that. But again, I can't stress how important it is that as an organization, whatever size you are, a lot of the friction of communication comes from mixing those channels and the expectations up. So, okay, quick little soapbox there.
I like it.
Awesome. So the need to say, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So with this one, usually we're always thinking about what we need to say to the other person or the group of people. And this is really about what do we need to say to ourselves in this moment to help ourselves feel better, really, right? To help ourselves feel more calm so that we can then express ourselves. So one of the things that we can say to ourselves is the word soften, right? You just say it to yourself 3 times and you can put your name in front of it. Like studies have shown that when we have self-directed self-talk, it really helps with emotional regulation, as well as if we say our name with it. But if you just say, soften to yourself 3 times, soft on the inhale and on the exhale, you'll start to notice the body starting to soften. And that's all we need. We just need that moment of like melting in that situation where we usually would like to be, hard, and it'll open it up completely for you to have a different conversation, right? So there's different words that we can say. And a lot of people already do this for themselves. They just might not realize it. There might be things that we say to ourselves in challenging moments that help us. That would be one thing you'd probably want to bring out in this moment, right?
What are the ways that we can determine what actually needs to be said at this point?
Yeah. So really what we're looking for here is something that, one, it relaxes us, right? Meaning it tends to our emotion a little bit as well. So you could say something like, this feels like a big deal. How can I turn it into a little deal? We're looking for things that switch our mindset a little bit, right? Like refocus, reset, like any word that is going to pop us out of this trance. If we can find a word that just drops us out of it really quickly, that's what we'd want to use, right? Like the opposite of what we're doing. So you could say open, like stay open, because usually we want to close down, right? So looking for words and phrases that are the opposite of what we're doing can always be helpful.
Now, obviously, of these 6 components of the soften method, each of them can be worked on individually, Like, I think some of us are going to find certain aspects of that or certain parts of that more difficult than others. But as a whole, overall, we want to get into the habit of making this a practice, a regular thing. How can we start building a habit of pausing?
Yeah. So I think the first piece that we always have to start practicing is just the sensation in the body, understanding what that is, because it's going to be the same in every difficult moment. It will be the same sensation, right? We have different default reactions. Like you'll react differently at home than you do at work, but the sensation is still the same in the body. So once you know the sensation, then it's about which one of these practices seems easy for me. Like, which one could I just start doing right now? And then I'm going to pick that one and I'm going to practice it for a week. And I'm just going to start to first notice, am I feeling uncomfortable in this conversation? If I'm feeling uncomfortable in this conversation, then I'm going to inhale for 5, hold for 5, exhale for 5. And I'm just going to see what happens to the conversation, right? It becomes more of like an experiment that we're doing. We're experimenting with different practices and seeing which one helps me, which one doesn't. And you're only going to probably find 1 or 2 that will be like go-to practices. Once you find your go-to practice, you don't have to do anything else fancy, right? You just sit with those, and those are the ones that work, and those are the ones that you do. So it's not about knowing and implementing and practicing all of them. It's seeing the ones that make sense and resonate and feel doable and sticking with it. You know, I also have a 30-day pause challenge to just help see, can it happen? You know?
Perfect. Yeah, we can link up to that in the show notes. Obviously, we want to get into this habitually. We want it to be regular, but like all things, setbacks happen. We kind of fall out. How do we recognize that we're doing that and refocus and get back to it?
Yeah. So we recognize that we're off track when we start noticing, like there's a moment where we'll notice that we have gone back into old habits, into old patterns. So we'll notice that the way that we're communicating might be coming from more of a fear-based place. We might notice that we're reacting more quickly than we had been before. We might notice that other people's reactions to us seem a little more agitated, right, and frustrated. So it really is that moment that it's always like remembering and forgetting, right? So one moment we remember or we see this doesn't feel right. And then we notice and understand, okay, I haven't been doing these practices. I'm going to, bring it back in and see what happens. And another piece to make it easier to kind of stick with is meditation. And that's something that you can do, you don't have to sit for hours. You can really just do 5-10 minutes, a few times a week, and you'll notice a difference.
Small, consistent efforts with meditation definitely help with this in terms of the initial awareness, as well as really applying to all 6 of those components of the approach. So, and again, like most things that are good to be habitual about, you're not going to get it right every time. And it's not about that. It's about coming back to it over and over again. And, we get healthier, we get a little less healthy. We get healthier, we get a little, it's just how it ebbs and flows, in other words.
It does. It's the law of rhythms, right? You're up and then you're down. And it's not something to get angry at ourselves about or upset at ourselves about. It's just something to start noticing and observing. I'm out of this. I want to get back to this because it felt good. So I'm going to do it. And then I'll probably find myself out of it again. Then it's that discipline of recommitting and coming back.
Yeah. Cynthia, it's been great talking with you. I want to point people to where they can find the book as well as that challenge and also your ongoing work. Let's share the links.
Sure. So, you can find the book wherever books are sold, right? You can find me at cynthiakane.com. You can find the 30-day pause challenge at cynthiakane.com. As well, I am on Instagram at cykane1. I'm also on YouTube, so you can just find me there. Just type my name in.
Like I said, I will link up to all those things in the show notes for the episode so people can find those quickly without having to do too much searching. And Cynthia, great book and great time with you, sharing your expertise and experience. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me. And it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. I hope that you enjoyed listening in on this conversation with Cynthia Kane, and I hope that the pause principle, and especially the soften method, are helping you consider how you can be more pauseful, if that's even a word, trademark, refocus and respond more mindfully when it comes to your communication, and especially reducing your stress in this stress-filled world. And if you found this conversation helpful, would you do me a favor and share this with somebody you know needs to hear it? Hit that share button in your podcast player app of choice where you're listening to this, or head on over to the show notes at beyondthetodolist.com, where you'll find the show notes as well as links to help support the show through different deals and sponsors, etc. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next episode.